am I bad for not going through and trying to fix this? Am I the bad guy? Why do I have to feel like I need to do this when it really isn't helping me, or I feel like it's toxic and it's just hurting me? But because everyone else is putting that pressure on you and you feel obligated, you stay in a toxic situation, even though you shouldn't, because it does not serve your best interest. Hey, y'all. Welcome to the From Surviving to Thriving podcast. You know, the place where we take the veil off and pull the curtains back on our everyday lives. I'm your host, Jackie. Today's episode is one that I know that so many of us need to hear about. We're going to be talking about letting go of toxic ties, how to release relationships that no longer serves us. Now, before I get started, if you're loving the podcast, please be sure to hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and leave a little review. Let me know what you think. Make sure you share it with someone that you think would benefit from any of these episodes and topics that I'm sharing. It will really help the podcast to grow and reach as many people that need the information as possible. All right, let's go ahead and dive right in. So first things first, what is a toxic relationship? And most people believe that toxic relationships are just the ones where you argue all the time. But really, toxicity is sometimes very subtle, and it's not always the easiest to identify when you're actually in or a part of the toxicity. So, if we were to try to put a definition on it, a toxic relationship, and this can be whether it's with your family, your romantic partner, or even in your platonic relationships. So, a toxic relationship is anyone that causes you stress, makes you feel unworthy, and constantly drains you. Since it's almost the end of February and I'm wrapping up this love and relationship and friendship series, we're going to take a look at toxic relationships when it comes to friendships, family, and of course, romantic relationships. And as we all know, toxic relationships can span into other aspects of our lives, as in our workplace. I know in I want to say episode 6 of the podcast, I talked about toxic work environments. So toxicity can appear anywhere in our life. As long as we're dealing with people, it can be present. But we're going to focus on the three that I feel tend to be the most important and most impactful to our lives. The first one we're going to look at is toxic romantic relationships. And these, you know what? I don't even know if it's worse than family relationships or not. Like, I feel like between toxic romantic relationships and toxic family relationships, there might be a little neck and neck, if I'm being honest. But I do feel like toxic romantic relationships do bring some other things that family don't necessarily bring. Based on the different things to look for in a toxic relationship, I'm going to provide some examples and let me know if you see yourself in any of these examples or if this has ever happened to you. So, if your partner constantly emotionally manipulates you or gaslights you, that's a clear sign that you may be in a toxic relationship. An example of that would be you're constantly having to question your own memory because your partner is gaslighting you. Whenever you bring up something that they may have done that hurts your feelings or is of concern to you, they pretend like it never happened, or it's such a small issue that you should just let it go because you're either being too sensitive or just taking things a little too seriously. So they're literally minimizing your emotions and gaslighting you into thinking that what happened really didn't happen. I'm sure we've all seen situations, especially nowadays, where we're being gaslit on a regular basis. And this is one of those common things that you see in a relationship where you will go to your partner to tell them, like, hey, I think, this thing that you said or that you did really hurt my feelings. And then they turn it around and make it seem like it was nothing, or they didn't do it at all. So that's one toxic trait to look for when it comes to romantic relationships. Another sign that you may be in a toxic relationship is that you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time. You don't know what is likely to set your partner off. So there are times where there might be issues that you want to discuss with them, but you don't know what their reaction is going to be. So you avoid bringing those topics up with them. If you've ever been in a situation where you feel like you have to walk on eggshells around someone, it's never a good feeling. Like it kind of stifles who you are. You're not as vocal because you feel like, oh my God, if I say the wrong thing, this person could blow up on me. You don't know what their reaction is going to be. Sometimes it could be violent. Sometimes it could just be, them being upset, but you just never know what you're going to get from that person. So that fear alone can be crippling. Another thing to look for when you are in a toxic relationship is when the effort feels very one sided. It feels like you are the partner that's constantly planning everything. You're the partner that is always trying you're the partner that is always trying to fix the situation and resolve whatever conflicts pop up. And your partner, on the other hand, does not seem to feel or have the same urge to fix things. They put as little effort into the relationship as possible. If you don't pick up the phone and call them, they're not rushing to pick up the phone and call you. So it feels as if you're in a relationship by yourself. Another toxic trait to look for when you are in a relationship is, of course, repeated betrayal, dishonesty, and disrespect. You caught your partner lying to you multiple times about where they were, who they were with, what they were doing, and they sometimes tend to be flirting with people and it doesn't seem appropriate. Now, when you approach them to talk to them about their behavior or what they've done, they flip that script on you and make you feel like you're in the wrong. You're just too insecure and you're making assumptions about things when in reality, they are doing something wrong, but they don't want to be accountable for their actions. So instead, they put it off on you. And the final thing to look for when you are in a toxic romantic relationship is you're starting to feel drained instead of being fulfilled by that relationship. Instead of the relationship being a place where you feel safe, you feel secure, and you feel loved, instead you feel exhausted, emotionally drained, and unappreciated. These relationships typically take a lot more out of us than it's really given to us. But for whatever reason, we tend to stay in those relationships because sometimes it's because we don't feel like we deserve better, or we've invested so much into the relationship, it just feels like it's a lot easier to just stay. The next one we're going to look at is toxic friendships. And yes, there are toxic friendships. And even though they're not on the same level, in my opinion, of the romantic relationships and the family relationships, friendships that are toxic do also affect us in a lot of ways. Some of the examples of toxic traits in your friendship is when you have a friend who only comes around when they want something. They're never there to support you when you need something from them, but they're constantly coming to you when they are in their time of need. So you have a friend that you've known for a very long time, but you start to notice that the only time they're reaching out is when they need you for something, whether it's a listening ear or some support in some way, shape, or form, or they just want something from you. That's when you're getting all the phone calls and you're getting all the messages. But when it's your turn to lean on them for support, they're nowhere to be found. That is the type of friend who is only around when it benefits them. And that is very toxic. Another toxic trait in friendships is when you have a friend that might just be jealous of you or feel like they're in competition with you. And then their behavior tend to be a bit passive aggressive when it comes to you. They're not the type of friend that's celebrating your successes. So you've gotten a new promotion or you got a new man that really loves you and you're sharing that information with them, and their reaction just doesn't seem genuine, or their happiness doesn't come off as really happiness, or they're giving you those backhanded compliments like, oh, it must be nice, that you get everything you want, like that type of reaction, instead of genuinely celebrating you and being happy for you. Those types of friendships are never good. Another type of toxic friendships is the ones where you don't get the support from that friend that you really need or deserve. But when they're going through their tough situations, you're there to support them. So if you are going through a rough patch in life, something devastating has happened to you, you've had a personal loss, or you've lost a family member, whatever the situation is, and you need somebody to lean on. Going through those times, it's always tough when you have to do it by yourself. So having supportive friends when you need them is important. And if you have that friend that when you're going through those types of situations, they're nowhere to be found. You can't, when you call them, they're not responding. They're not showing up for you. They're not in your presence, even if it's just for a hug or just to listen or to cry with. Then you know that that's probably one of those toxic friends. I think the worst one out of all of those that I've listed is probably the friend that you find out is not really your friend after the fact. And these friends typically end up getting outed because they're talking ish behind your back and you end up finding out. But those are the most toxic, I think. Like, they're actually pretending to be one way in front of your face, but then when they get behind your back, they're making fun of situations that you're going through. They're telling things that you've said in confidence that would definitely make you look bad in some way. Yeah, definitely a toxic friendship, and one that I don't wish on anyone. The last group that we're going to look at is toxic family members. Yes, to me, I feel like toxic family members are just as bad as toxic relationships. Maybe even worse. I don't know. Because these are your blood relatives. So you feel like they should know better and they should do better, but they don't. Yeah, I feel like that cuts a little deeper. Just me. One of the ways that toxicity shows up in family relationships is when there are parents or relatives who are overly critical or controlling and even manipulative. And you see this oftentimes when just a parent and child relationship where parents have these overly impossible standards for their children, and the children tend to feel like no matter what they do, they can never live up to those parent standards. So they don't, no matter what kind of education they get, no matter what kind of career they get into, nothing they do is ever going to make that parent feel proud of them. And that sort of feeling is definitely toxic in a family relationship. Another thing that's toxic in family relationships is emotionally blackmailing people or guilt tripping them, giving them the silent treatment, or being overly controlling over finances when it comes to what you do for them to assist them. This tend to show up again a lot in like parent and children relationship, where parents will use some of these tactics to try to control their child. If the child wants to make a decision about their life, say they don't want to go to college, they instead want to go and pursue some other career that doesn't involve whatever it is that the parent had in mind for them. Sometimes you'll see that parents will try to, pull back financial assistance to that child, or even say things to guilt trip them, like, oh, look at all the things that I've done for you, and I've paid for this, and I've put you in the best schools to prepare you for college, to make the child feel guilty about making a decision for themselves about their life that is different from what the parent wants them to do. So that in itself is also another toxic environment to be in. There's also the family members who refuse to respect boundaries. So that also creates a toxic environment. Sometimes parents or even siblings feel the need to overstep their boundaries and sometimes get into other people's relationships or marriages, or feel like they have a right to chime into certain situations that is not necessarily their place. So siblings or children sometimes put up boundaries, and family members decide that those boundaries don't necessarily apply to them. And that definitely creates a toxic family environment. If you're feeling emotionally drained after interaction with your family members, that means that you are definitely in a toxic family relationship. Like, when I'm around my family, I tend to have a really good time. Like, I am laughing, joking with each other, and that to me is what family time is supposed to be. But when it starts to feel like overwhelming, or it feels like they're taking your energy out of you, or you're exhausted from the emotional baggage or the emotional weight that's being dumped on you, yeah, that sounds like a toxic family situation. As I mentioned before, I definitely feel like when it comes to these three categories, family is probably the toughest. And then I would say romantic relationships, of course, and then friendships. And I think the family portion of it is a lot harder to navigate, because these are people that you're really connected to biologically. So it's not as easy to cut ties with someone when that's your blood relative. However, at the end of the day, your well being and your self preservation is more important than any relationship. So, as hard as it is for toxic family situations to just step away from it, sometimes that is in your best interest, and that is something that you should do. If any of those examples or situations that I mentioned resonate with you, then that definitely means that you are experiencing or have experienced some sort of toxic relationship. So, if we know what a toxic relationship is, we know what it does to us. Why is it so hard to let go and walk away from toxic relationships? Let's take a look at some of the reasons why. The first one we're going to talk about real quick is just the fear of being lonely. The relationships that I mentioned earlier, the romantic relationship, the family relationship, and the friendships, those are all core, tight, close relationships. If you're having to sever those relationships, that fear of not having that person in your life is pretty heavy. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like cutting someone off that you love and care about is an easy thing. Yes, I've had to do it over my lifetime, but it wasn't an easy decision to make. It took a lot of, self evaluation and analyzing what it is that I needed as a person, and deciding to let go because that was no longer serving me any good. But at the end of the day, it still was not a good feeling. So knowing that that fear of loneliness is there, a lot of people tend to stay in toxic relationships because it just seems easier than having to walk away. Another part of that is hoping that the person is going to change. Like maybe if I keep explaining to them, or maybe if I keep letting them know, or maybe they'll come around one day, or maybe they'll realize how much of an impact this is having on me and they'll change their toxic ways. We all have had those thoughts. I know I have. And that's not usually how that works. So that hope that we have for that person changing tend to keep us in those situations longer than we really need to be in them. Another big reason is just the emotional investment that we put into these relationships. With family, a lot of the times we've grown up with these people or they've raised us. So we automatically have some sort of emotional attachment and ties to them. But when it comes to the friendship side and even the romantic side, you've built such a rapport with this person. You have this emotional connection that you've built over time. And to just walk away from all of that, sometimes it feels like you failed in some way, shape, or form. And no one really wants to feel like a failure. So walking away when you've invested so much, I know for a fact that's hard. It's definitely hard to do. And the last one is guilt and obligation. Having that sense of guilt or obligation to a person will make you feel like you have to stay in a toxic situation when you really don't. And this is even worse when it comes to family relationships that are toxic because we've all been taught that this is family. You stick it out, you work through it, or you're always being told, like, go fix that relationship. That's your mom, or that's your sister, or that's your brother, or that's your uncle. You're always told these things. So you're automatically feeling that guilt, like, oh man, like, am I bad for not going through and trying to fix this? Am I the bad guy? Why do I have to feel like I need to do this when it really isn't helping me, or I feel like it's toxic and it's just hurting me? But because everyone else is putting that pressure on you and you feel obligated, you stay in a toxic situation even though you shouldn't, because it does not serve your best interest. At the end of the day, we have to step aside from the fact that there are justifications for people's behavior. Yes, someone might have been through something, and that is the reason why they act a certain way, or that's the reason why they do certain things. But that doesn't mean that you have to stick around and endure being in a toxic environment just because they've been through some things. We have to learn to put ourselves first and our well being first. So let's talk about how to let go of the toxic relationship. We all know letting go is never easy. It's very hard, it's a process, but in order to grow and move on, you have to let go. To start the letting go process, the first thing we have to do is acknowledge the toxicity. We need to recognize that the relationship that we're in is toxic and it's not good for us. It's not serving us any purpose, but bad. It's not healthy at all. And the big thing that we have to do in order to start that process, we have to stop making excuses for bad behavior. So, no more excuse for why this person is acting the way that they're acting. That is not your responsibility. That is not your job. You do not have to justify why they're doing what they're doing just so you can stay. Let it go, move on, stop justifying their behavior. The next thing we have to do is, and I know I say this all the time, set some boundaries. Boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. Communicate to them what your boundaries are. And if you need to cut some of those relationships off, cut them off. And if you just need to limit your exposure to that relationship, limit your exposure to that relationship. So if you know you can only give that person 5 minutes before they start driving you nuts, give them the 5 minutes and then exit. The next thing we have to do is accept the fact that you may not get closure from that toxic relationship. You have to be okay walking away from that relationship and realizing that that person might never apologize for what they've done to you. They may never accept responsibility for their actions, but ultimately, you just have to forgive the situation and let it go and move on. The next step is to focus on your healing journey, whatever that looks like. That may be going to therapy, that might be journaling, or just having some sort of self care routine that helps you mentally, emotionally, or physically. Whatever need it is that you have, fulfill those needs. Focus on your healing. A part of that is making sure that you have a healthy support system around you that can help you through that healing process. And finally, be kind to yourself. Be kind to yourself. The path to healing or the journey to healing takes time, it takes energy, and it takes effort. So give yourself time, give yourself the grace that you need to take care of yourself. Now that you have let go and you have moved on from the toxic relationship, now it's time to start building healthy relationships. These are the relationships that uplift you and support you and bring you to that place of healing that you've been working towards. Some of the ways to do that is to surround yourself with people that are positive. So the friendships that you start to build should be with people that are of a like mind. The people who you know are uplifting you. The people who you know are heading in the same direction that you're going in. You also want to make sure that you're practicing healthy communication. You want to make sure that those boundaries that you have set, you communicate those boundaries to the people that you're surrounding yourself with. That way they know where your lines lie. This is also a good opportunity to express those needs that you have. There's nothing wrong with telling people what it is that you require of them, especially if you're the type of person that's a giver. In order for people to sometimes reciprocate, givers have to speak up. Make sure that you're trusting your intuition. If something does not seem right about someone or there are red flags popping up, don't ignore them. They're there for a reason. If those alarm bells are going off, there's a reason why those bells are going off. The goal of all of this is for us to continue to keep growing. If you keep working on becoming the best version of you, the people that you need to attract, they will come. As I wrap this episode, let's take the time to acknowledge that letting go of toxic relationships is definitely a hard thing to do. But it is one of the most freeing thing to do. It's really about protecting your peace and choosing yourself above anything else. If this episode resonated with you, I would love to hear your thoughts. Please send me a DM on my TikTok at fstt.podcast or just leave a comment below. And if you know someone that needs to hear this episode, definitely hit that share button and share it with them. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And if it resonated with you at all, don't forget to leave that 5-star rating. Thank you so much for joining me. Until next time, protect your peace, set those boundaries, and don't let any relationship drain you. And I will see you in the next episode.